I'm going to give a talk about a proposal that I made to Stephen Wolfram quite a while ago. This just recently bubbled up in the priorities because of our interest in 3D printing. And this is an audience participation talk. I'm going to give a brief presentation, and then the interesting part is going to come from you, I hope. So let me just jump to my last slide so you can prepare for it. So when I'm talking about this proposal, I'd like you to keep these questions in mind. What could you imagine using a design space site for? Can you imagine any interesting design spaces that you might want to explore? And have you ever seen a design space site like this before? So here's a very simple manipulate based on a very simple idea. You have these rounded stars, so it's just essentially a circle whose radius is modulated by a sine. And I've given myself controls for the number of points on the star and the depth of the indentations in the star. Now, of course, this shape is drawn using straight line segment approximation. And if you crank the resolution down, eventually you start seeing the line segments, and you get this interaction between the number of points on the stars and the resolution that you're drawing it with. So you get these ink splat kinds of figures. And depending on how the parameters interact, you can get a large variety of different kinds of ink splats. So now you take one of these figures and you just stack it up with ever smaller copies of itself, alternately black and white. And if you continue that, then you start getting these kinds of effects. And now if I add just a tiny bit of displacement to each copy, then you also start getting some, let me crank the points down just a little bit, you also start getting some three-dimensional quality. And then you can also add some rotation to successive copies, and then you start getting a really wide variety of different kinds of graphic effects. And so as I scrub through here, there's a really diverse variety of graphic effects that you can get from this simple idea. And this is a design space, right? It's a family of designs, not a particular design, but a family of designs. And conceptually, the addresses of the designs within the design space are given by the settings of the controls. So, and because of the way the controls interact, you get this complexity that is absolutely impossible to predict. You know, I can show you the code, I can show you the values, the parameters. There's no way you're going to know what this is going to look like, right? So I would love to have a bot that goes out into this design space and finds interesting forms for me. But of course, what's interesting depends on details of the human visual system and perception and psychology and lots of stuff. And until we can model those things somehow, we're not going to have automatic agents that can go out and find these things. So the only way to find the interesting things in this design space is to go out and explore it, for people to go out and explore it. And that was the genesis of the idea that I presented to Stephen, which was, what if we had a website where people could submit design spaces and other people could come and explore them? And if we could bring the social aspect into the exploration of design spaces, then interesting design spaces might get explored, new phenomena, interesting phenomena might be discovered, and people might be encouraged to create even more interesting design spaces for others to explore. So this is the proposal that I gave to Stephen. So the site might be called the Wolfram Design Space. This just explains what a design space is, as I just explained to you. And I think the Wolfram language is particularly good at describing design spaces because it's very high level. It's very easy to create the interfaces you need to do the exploration. And it has such a breadth of functionality that you can describe a large variety of phenomena. And I really don't know any other language that would be so appropriate for describing design spaces as the Wolfram language. So as I explained, these spaces can be just unimaginably vast. You know, a few parameters and you've got a huge combinatorial explosion. But they can contain very interesting particular designs, and the only way to find out what's in there is to go out and explore them. So you got to have people exploring them. So my proposal was that Wolfram Research should create this website called the Wolfram Design Space, and we would organize design spaces that are charted and mapped, and that this would serve as an ongoing source of ideas or material or just cool visuals, whatever. So there would be 4 ways to participate: submitting, exploring, rating, and browsing. So of course the first step would be for people to submit design spaces, and really a lot of them are just very much like demonstrations, the things that are submitted to demonstrations. But this site would bring some additional support to this exploration aspect. And then you could come to the site and explore spaces that other people have submitted and plant flags at interesting locations in the design space. So that way we start to map out what these design spaces look like and where the interesting things in them are. And then you could also come and look at the things that people have found and like them or not, so that you start to get a feeling for what the terrain looks like, not only where the interesting things are, but how interesting they are. And then finally, you might come to the site just to see what's there, the interesting stuff that's there, just to get inspiration. You might want to take material out of the site to elaborate, to make a logo, for example. Or you might come to the site, and this was the motivation for bringing this up again. The site might be a repository for parametric 3D designs, so you might come there to customize a design and 3D print it. So for the design world, I think this would provide several things. It provides an infrastructure for this idea of social exploration of design spaces. It promotes the idea of a design space as a thing to be designed in itself. And I'll get to that a little more later. It promotes the concept of crowdsourced social exploration of design space, creating communities of people that are exploring these things. And it can serve as a resource for just interesting material. I think we should be doing this because we have the technology to do it right, primarily the Wolfram language. And we have the experience to do it right because we've been collecting experience with CDF, with Wolfram Community, with demonstrations, Wolfram Cloud. All of these aspects are really important. And I think this is uncolonized internet territory. I don't know of any sites that attempt to support this. Okay, so my interest is in primarily graphic design and 3D sculptural design, and particularly in design spaces that are intentionally designed to be surprising, to be unpredictable, to have interesting things out there defined when you go and explore them. But there are many different varieties, possible varieties of design spaces, both in the domain of things that are in the design space and the way the design space is constructed, for what purpose. So let me just go through some examples. Spaces of dimensioned structures is a possibility. So in contrast to the design space that I described before, if I tell you the dimensions of a phone case, you can probably imagine what it might look like, right? It's not a huge leap of imagination. But there's still a role for social exploration here because you can crowdsource having people, put on all the right dimensions for all the different kinds of phones there are, and planting flags. This is the iPhone case. This is the Galaxy case. Whatever. I think architecture might be an interesting application area, especially in massing studies, generative architecture, which is a hot topic in some circles. Logos would be an interesting application. And in fact, I made a demonstration which a group at the University of Pennsylvania, it was a demonstration for exploring a particular kind of logo, family of logos, and a group at the University of Pennsylvania made a swoosh logo for their group with it. I think that kind of thing could be interesting. Could be parametric clip art, like this heart shape. Or art. Pardon? Oh, really? Okay, one of Abby's students did this. Yeah, so this is make your own Rothko, right? It's kind of like Joseph Alber's color study explorations. Or this sort of op art Vasarely-like thing. There's no reason that the objects in the design space cannot contain a time parameter, so you could explore design spaces of animations like this one. This is one of Clayton Schonkweiler's endless loop GIF animations, which I modified to, it was just a single parameter, so you can explore different variations on that. And then similarly, by incorporating time, right, for example, weight cursor animations, right? You can just have this thing running and explore various graphical variations on that. Also with time dimension, sound is a very rich, can be very rich design spaces. Let me plug in here. Right, so this is a very simple FN synthesis, but even with just 2 parameters, there's a very large range of different effects. Add a couple of more controls and you've got a huge space of interesting sounds to explore. And along the same lines, music, right? Melodies, harmonies, rhythms, whatever. So one reason that people might be inclined to visit a site like this would be to get material outputs. And of course, there are sites like Zazzle and Sculptio and Shapeways and so forth. You can, with Zazzle, you can print your graphic design on anything you can think of: shirts, pillows, mugs, flip-flops, whatever. Of course, 3D printing or laser cutting, whatever. So I anticipate we would have a connection, depending on the type of the output, to all these printing, reproduction services. So, big question for me is, if we were to do this, what would give it staying power? What would make it an active community? What would draw people in? What would keep people coming? And I think that it would be the social aspect. So if I submit a design space, I'm going to be interested in what people find in the design space and what designs they find interesting. If I find something interesting in a design space, I'm going to be interested in what other people find that's interesting. Or I might be, I might see a related design space that I want to implement and throw out there for other people to explore. So my hope is, if we were to do this, that it would become a vibrant community of people creating design spaces, exploring design spaces, and finding interesting stuff. So that brings me to my final slide again. So I'd like to hear from you if you have any ideas about what you could imagine using a design space site for. Can you imagine any interesting design spaces you might like to explore? And have you ever seen anything like this elsewhere? Michael? All right. Thank you.